Welcome to a series of conversations with artists, thinkers, and leaders from around the world presented by the Banff Center. I'm Mónica de la Torre, as you know, and we're here to talk about the art of literary translation, perhaps about vermin as well, and dogs, with authors RAWI HAGE, Madeleine Tien, and professor and translator KRZYSZTOF MAJER. I'm going to introduce them first, and then they will each read some excerpts of their works. Madeleine Tien is the author of 3 books of fiction, including her most recent novel, Dogs at the Perimeter, which was shortlisted for the 2014 International Literature Prize awarded in Berlin. Her books have been translated into 20 languages, and her essays and fiction are widely published, including in The Guardian, The Sunday Times, Globe and Mail, Granta, Brick, and the Asia Literary Review. Since 2010, she has been part of the international faculty in the MFA program at the City University of Hong Kong. And a new novel, Awake Now and Cross Towards Her, will be published by Knopf in 2016. I have very good news to share with you today, and that is that yesterday, Madeleine was told that she received a wonderful prize for Dogs at the Perimeter. It has just been awarded the Frankfurt Book Fair Literature Prize, given to a female writer from Africa, Asia, Latin America, and the Arab world. It's a huge deal. Congratulations. To Madeleine's left is KRZYSZTOF MAJER, who is an assistant professor at the University of Łódź in Poland. He researches Canadian fiction, Jewish literature, and intermediality. He has written on Mordecai Richler, RAWI HAGE, editing a collection, Beirut to Carnival City, rereading RAWI HAGE. He's also written on Mark Anthony Jarman, Vladimir Nabokov, Thomas Bernhard, and the Coen brothers. I love that addition, very, very good. He translates literature and criticism into Polish and has translated Allen Ginsberg's letters, the Kerouac and Ginsberg correspondence, and also shorter translations of excerpts of Chinua Achebe's, Niall Griffith's. They have appeared in the Literatura na Świecie, which is world literature, and Art Inquiry. He's currently working on Patrick DeWitt's Under Mayordomo Minor. And lastly, RAWI HAGE was born in Beirut. He is a writer and author of De Niro's Game and Cockroach, and also a visual artist. He's the recipient of many literary awards. His works have been translated into 30 languages, and Howie resides in Montreal. So that said, we will begin with Madeleine reading. Yes.
Okay. So I'll just read a very short excerpt from Dogs at the Perimeter. And to set it up, Dogs at the Perimeter is set in Cambodia in the 1970s. So in the aftermath of the Cambodian Civil War, which is very much tied into the geopolitics and the upheaval of the Vietnam War. From 1975 to 1979, the Cambodian genocide took place when the Khmer Rouge and Pol Pot tried to return the country to what they called Year Zero and to enact the fastest, purest communist revolution in human history. 1/3 of Cambodians lost their lives, and almost every person was displaced. So the excerpt happens quite near the end of the novel, so you'll just sort of be landed right into it. It's about a young man who is a doctor and was trapped in Cambodia until the end of the genocide, when he's looking for his wife, Sorya, and he's remembering Sorya's brother, Darawit. James had felt at the time lonely, an outsider watching these 2 siblings, this self-sufficient love. But he knows now there are no outsiders. There is no walking away at the end. Delusion has to finish somewhere. It has to end, or else weakness will outlast them all. He has to commit to something or be done. From Kampot, he travels to the prison, where Chorn Tu was eventually arrested. In the storeroom where James passed nearly 2 years, boxes are rotting in the heat. Files in pages, confusions, accusations. He went through them and found Sorya's 6th letter, the last one. The same thin weight of paper, but her handwriting had deteriorated. The pen had hardly any ink. Who was she writing to? Not James anymore, or not just James. "They are throwing us away," she wrote, "and I can't understand why, because all I wanted was for the war to end, no matter who won. I never admitted any allegiance. My name is Soria. I am the sister of Darit, the daughter of Cravan and Mary, the wife of James. I was a teacher." There was a biography and a confession, and in the biography was the name of their son, just as Chorn had told him. The prison file had dates, but no date of death. There was not even a photograph. There was no file for the baby, and he dared to believe that they had been absolved, that she wandered like him with a different name and a new soul. Everyone is searching. Everyone is looking into every passing face and wondering if the next person along the road will be the beloved, the dreamt of. Maybe this life is the dream. If gods existed, he would still be waking up to the sound of her moving through the apartment. Here she is now, coming into the room to wake him. Here she is. "I'm a selfish Buddhist," she had told him once. "Something of me will return, something will come around and around forever, but it won't be Soria. I only have this one chance." James traveled on, chasing a rumor of Darit to the Laos-Cambodian border, where caves slip into one country and out the other. He can guess the date of his son's birthday. Small children, he knows, were sent to America, to France. They took flight to places he can't imagine, or they persevered here. The jungle has invaded the cities, but now the hungry people are cutting it back. They are skinning the trees again and eating the bark. From place to place, he defaces the walls with a black marker. Khmer words, Khmer letters, Soria, Darit, James. You can follow the trail, but you can't know in which direction you are headed, down to the end, or reversing forever to the beginning.
So I'll read a shorter fragment in Polish. W tamtych dniach James czuł się samotny, jak gdyby przyglądał się z zewnątrz tej dwójce rodzeństwa, ich samowystarczalnej miłości. Teraz już wie, że nikt nie może pozostać na zewnątrz. Nie da się na sam koniec po prostu odejść. Złudzenie musi mieć jakiś kres, musi się skończyć, bo w przeciwnym razie słabość pokona ich wszystkich. James musi się w coś zaangażować albo dać sobie spokój. Z Kampot dociera do więzienia, do którego wreszcie wtrącono nawet Chorna. W pomieszczeniu gospodarczym, gdzie James spędził blisko 2 lata od upału, gniją pudła, teczki i strony, zmylenia, oskarżenia. Przekopał się przez to wszystko i znalazł 6., ostatni list. Papier tak samo cienki, leciutki, ale pismo już zmizerniałe. W piórze wyczerpywał się atrament. Kto był adresatem? Już nie James, a w każdym razie nie tylko on. Wyrzucają nas jak śmieci, pisała, a ja nie rozumiem czemu. Przecież zawsze pragnęłam tylko jednego, żeby wojna wreszcie się skończyła, bez względu na to, kto wygra. Nigdy nie opowiedziałam się po żadnej stronie. Mam na imię Soria, jestem siostrą Dararita, córką Cravana i Mary, żoną Jamesa. Byłam nauczycielką. Oto jej biografia i zeznania, a w biografii imię ich syna, identyczne z tym, które podał mu Chorn. W więziennej kartotece były różne daty, ale nigdzie nie mógł znaleźć daty śmierci. Nie było nawet zdjęcia ani osobnych akt dla dziecka. Dlatego odważył się uwierzyć, że ich rozgrzeszono, że ona też tuła się teraz po tym kraju pod innym nazwiskiem i z nową duszą. Tu każdy kogoś szuka, zagląda w każdą napotkaną twarz i zastanawia się, czy kolejna osoba, która wyłoni się zza rogu, będzie tą ukochaną, tą wymarzoną. Być może to życie rzeczywiście jest snem. Gdyby bogowie istnieli, wciąż budziłby go dźwięk jej kroków w ich mieszkaniu. Soria, już tu jest. Właśnie weszła do pokoju, żeby go obudzić. Już tu jest. Dziękuję.
Hi, it's good to be here. Yeah, I'll briefly put this in context. Cockroach is a story of a new immigrant just arrived to Montreal on a winter day. There's an failed attempt of suicide, and he was forced to see a psychiatrist, among other things. But this is in a nutshell. The passage, it's Christoph who suggested it. I guess he liked the satire. I ran downstairs to look for the bastard at the cafe, and God behold, 2 Jehovah's Witness ladies flashed their Caribbean smiles and obstructed my flight with the towering feathery straw hats that pasted the coconut shade into the gritty steps of the crumbling building where I live. "Are you interested in the world?" they asked me. And before I had chance to reply, one of the ladies, the one in the long quilted coat, slapped me with an apocalyptic prophecy. "Are you aware of the hole in the ozone above us?" "Ozone?" I asked. "Yes, ozone. Am I pronouncing this right?" It is the atmospheric layer that protects us from the burning rays of the sun. There is a hole in it as we speak, and it's expanding, and soon we shall all fry. Only the cockroaches shall survive to rule the earth. But do not despair, young man, because you will redeem yourself today if you buy this magazine. I happen to have few copies in my hand here, and attend Bible gatherings at our Kingdom Hall. And afterwards, my handsome fellow, you can come down to the basement and listen to the leader with a cookie and a styrofoam cup in the hand. And he will tell you that transfusions, be they administered through a syringe, a medical doctor, or perverted sex, are a mortal sin. Then, and only then, you'll have a chance. Repent, the woman shouted as she opened the Bible to a marked page. And she read, Therefore will I also deal in fury. Mine eyes shall not spare, neither will I pity. And though they cry in mine ears with loud voices, yet I will not hear them. Buy this magazine, the word of the Lord included my son. Read it and repent. How much? I asked, as I liberated my pocket from the sinful weight of few round coins sealed with adultery images of ducks, geese, bears, and magisterial heads. They were all I had. Give me those coins and pray, because then, and only then, you'll have the chance to be beamed up by Jesus, our Savior. And while you're ascending towards the heavens, you can take a peek down at those neighbors of yours who just slammed the door in my face. You can watch them fry like dumplings in a wok, and I assure you that our Lord will be indifferent to their plight, their sufferings, their loud cries of agony and regret and pain. Yes, pain. And may God save us from such a harrowing pain. I kissed Jehovah's Witness lady's hand. I asked him to have mercy on me on that sizzling day to come. Dying from fire is a terrible thing. If I had to choose, I would certainly want something less painful, quicker, maybe even poetic, like hanging from a willow tree or taking a bullet in the head or falling into a senseless eternal slumber accompanied by the aroma of a leaky gas stove. Thank you.
So again, a shorter fragment. Zbiegam na dół szukać gnojka w kawiarni, a tu wielkie nieba, dwie jechówki roztaczają przede mną swe karaibskie uśmiechy. Drogę ucieczki odcięły mi niebotyczne słomkowe kapelusze z piórkiem, kładące się kokosowym cieniem na żwirowatych stopniach rudery, w której mieszkam. Czy interesuje pana los świata? Spytały. Nawet nie zdążyłem odpowiedzieć, a już jedna z dam, ta w długim pikowanym płaszczu, potraktowała mnie apokalipsą. Czy zdaje pan sobie sprawę z tego, że tam na górze się dziura zrobiła w ozonie? W ozonie? Spytałem. A tak, w ozonie, w warstwie atmosfery, która nas chroni przed palącymi promieniami słońca. Tam właśnie jest dziura, cały czas się powiększa i niedługo się wszyscy usmażymy. Ja to panu powiadam. Przetrwają jeno karaluchy i to one będą władać ziemią. Niech pan jednak nie rozpacza, młody człowieku, albowiem może pan już dziś zostać zbawiony. Wystarczy zakupić ten oto magazyn. O, akurat mam przy sobie parę egzemplarzy. I uczęszczać na spotkania biblijne w naszej sali królestwa. Później zaś kawaler może zejść do sutereny, gdzie przemawia starszy zboru i tam się kawaler dowie, w jednej ręce trzymając ciastko, a w drugiej styropianowy kubeczek, że wszelkie transfuzje to grzech śmiertelny i nieważne czy przez strzykawkę, czy przez jakieś zboczenia, ani czy jest przy tym lekarz. Wówczas tylko będzie kawaler miał jakąś szansę. Trzeba okazać skruchę, krzyknęła, otwierając Biblię na zaznaczonej stronie. Następnie przeczytała, albowiem tako rzecze Pan, mój synu, również i ja będę postępował z nimi z zapalczywością. Oko moje nie okaże litości i nie będę oszczędzał, a będą wołać do moich uszu donośnym głosem, lecz ja ich nie wysłucham. Kup zatem, synu, ten magazyn, słowo pańskie w pakiecie, przeczytaj i okaż skruchę. Ile płacę? Spytałem, uwalniając z kieszeń od grzesznej wagi paru okrągłych monet, na których wytłoczono bałwochwalcze podobizny kaczek, gęsi, niedźwiedzi i różnych władczych facjat. Więcej nie miałem przy sobie. Daj no te monety i módl się, albowiem wówczas tylko Zbawiciel nasz Jezus teleportuje cię do wnętrza niebios i kiedy już będziesz w nie wstępował, zerknij w dół na tych sąsiadów, którzy chwilę temu zatrzasnęli nam drzwi przed nosem. Będziesz mógł im się przyjrzeć, albowiem smażyć się będą niczym kluski na patelni, a ja zaświadczam ci, że nasz Pan za nic będzie miał ich niedolę, ich męczarnie, ich donośne wrzaski, ich udrękę, żal i ból. O tak, ból. Niech nas Bóg uchroni przed tak potwornym bólem.
I have a burning question for you. Are there Jehovah's Witnesses in Poland?
Yes,
Ah.
yes, there are. It's a familiar phenomenon, so no translation problem there.
Okay, good. Okay, maybe you can talk a little bit about the translation project that you're actually working on and what it involves.
Yes, so I'd like to start by thanking the Banff Center for accepting my project here. It's an honor to be here, and it's a wonderful learning experience. And the project that I came here with is an issue of a literary journal called Literatura na świecie, which means world literature in Polish. It's a journal which publishes translations of literature from around the world, and it also publishes critique of translation. And the issues are usually thematically organized, so there's usually a theme. It's either a particular country that is being represented or a particular writer. And in this case, it is going to be an issue devoted to Canadian writing, Canadian fiction. Recent Canadian fiction, because we've already had one issue devoted to Canada. That was in 1998, and I thought that it was high time to maybe refresh the idea that Poles had of Canadian writing, because the names that are recognizable in Poland as Canadian writing are Margaret Atwood, Alice Munro, Michael Ondaatje, Jan Martel, and not to take anything away from those writers, but I feel that there are other things happening in Canada at the moment, and other writers who are producing very exciting work, and I'm very happy to have two of them sitting on on each side of me at this moment. So this is an issue which is going to feature a long excerpt from Cockroach, the novel from which RAWI just read, a short story by Madeleine Tien, Simple Recipes, which has now become a classic, a Canadian classic, and also fiction from other 7 writers, Douglas Glover, Lynn Cody, Mark Anthony Jarman, Michael Winter, Lisa Moore, Bill Gaston, and John Gould. Mm. These will also be short stories.
Right.
So that's the idea.
All of whom write in English. Right?
All of whom write in English, yes. This is, and I've forgotten to mention this, since I'm not proficient in French, and I wouldn't never dare to translate from French. This will be an issue which is devoted to English language Canadian writing, the one that I happen to know something about. Maybe not so that much, but something.
And maybe a question for the author. So how involved were you in deciding which excerpt or which story to put forth in this issue? And then once you've chosen how to be represented and how you will be representing the English written literature in this, the writing in English written in Canada. Once you've settled that, how collaborative is your process?
Actually, I didn't know which story KRZYSZTOF was going to choose. I'm not surprised at Simple Recipes because it is the most anthologized one. It did sort of seem to fill a gap that existed in Canadian literature at that time. It's odd for me because it's a story I wrote more than 15 years ago. But I am happy to see it translated. Yeah.
And that was also why today, for the purpose of this meeting, we chose an excerpt from the recent novel Dogs at the Perimeter, and I've decided to translate a fragment of the novel for our meeting here, so that we could have newer texts.
Right. How about you, RAWI?
No, I wasn't consulted, I think. But I didn't object either. Yeah, I think KRZYSZTOF took the liberty to choose, and to choose the book that he wants to highlight, actually, Cockroach. I think Cockroach is my probably most Canadian book in that sense, and since it's about Canada, I guess it makes sense. Yeah, I mean, Canadian, but there's also certain critique of Canada, and it's a story of a new immigrant, so I guess it makes sense to put it in that context of Canada.
Right, and in that sense, you could even say that the works, at least of yours, that is in the book, is coming from authors with a complicated relationship to the English language, right? In the sense that you, Maddie, have described growing up in a family where your parents spoke Chinese, different dialects of Chinese, and used English as a lingua franca amongst them. But that certainly must have informed your writing, and I'd love to hear a little bit about that. And why don't we hear that, and then I'll ask you, RAWI, about your linguistic experience with English. But so, Maddie, how do you think that particular experience of English through dialects of Chinese has influenced your development as a writer?
I think when I was younger, say around the time I was writing Simple Recipes, I probably would have said it hadn't affected it because English is my mother language, my mother tongue. It's the language I've always spoke to my parents in. My mother speaks Cantonese, my father Hakka, and in fact, they don't speak each other's dialects. So if they didn't want us to understand, my mother would speak her dialect and my father would speak his, and they would understand each other, but we wouldn't understand them. And interestingly enough, as I think is very common in immigrant families, the children become the translators. The children translate all the documents, the paperwork, and so on. Even though my parents were very fluent, they still felt a certain uncertainty. But also the children translate the culture back into the household. And now it's only over time as I get older that I feel that those languages are so deeply inflected in my English, partly in what I choose to express and also what I have difficulty expressing in the English language, and all the silences and gaps and all the workarounds, that I have to use English for, even though I'm not fluent in any of my parents' languages.
Super interesting. How about you, RAWI?
My relationship to language is very complex. I grew up speaking Arabic at home in Beirut, and went to it wasn't French school as much as it was Lebanese school, but they taught most of the material in French. So since the age of 3, I was taught French. The other day I was walking in Montreal, and this guy is playing some 19th century French song, and I said, I know that song. It's a few nuns used to teach us that song, and then I went and researched it. And it's about la chasse de moule, c'est quoi le moule?
Mussels?
Mussels. picking up muscles. In Britain or France, I had nothing to do with it. But when I heard it, it was the most profound, sad experience I had. And I didn't know. It came to me like a ton of bricks. But then when I realized what's the origin of this, it was such a conflicting thing about my childhood. Anyway, that's in parentheses. But yes, I exposed to French language as a kid. Then I left at the age of 19, 18, end up in New York without having access to Arabic books. We were always readers in the family, or French books. There was a French store in Rockefeller Center, and it's very expensive. Books were very, very expensive. I was very tempted to shoplift a few.
Glad you did it.
And anyone who
might not be
shoplifted
here.
books, it seems like it's something very legitimate to do. But I didn't. So I started reading in English. I remember reading. I started reading the Russians. I read all the Russians, the whole canon in English.
Brilliant.
At the time, I was in kind of a situation, very hard situation economically. The war was happening in Beirut. I was cut off from my family, and I felt this affiliations with the Russians. Like they're proud, but they're also sad, and they're tragic, and they're not afraid to show violence or what in New York they would say khubza. So that's my relationship. And then I came to Canada and I went through English school, and I started I wrote in English because it was an extension of my academic years. I think Québécois, they always ask me why I didn't write in French. That's a question that always comes.
I was about to ask you. You read my mind.
Or Arabic for that matter, but just circumstances. My answer is always was never an ideological decision on my part. It's just circumstances. Language was something. It was a tool, more than anything.
So my question for you, KRZYSZTOF, would be, how do you? This is something that comes up a lot in translation, where you expect the translator to be incredibly proficient in this language as if this language existed on its own and wasn't first a repository of all the readings that the readings that are being translated. They're coming from different traditions, and all the readings of a particular author might be in 1 or 2 or 3 languages, but there's so much going into that work that has already been filtered through translation. So there's that on the one hand, and on the other hand, in this particular instance, you're dealing with 2 authors with these particularities or singularities, and they're very determining of or decisive in the writing. So I wonder how, as a translator, you deal with these nuances. Do they pose significant problems? Do you think about them? Maybe you don't think about them, and you think that maybe just in the writing itself there will be something seeping in that you don't need to worry about. What's your take on this?
It's interesting because language, I think, is central to the selection of the writers into this issue, and this is not just about Madeleine and RAWI, but all in all, I was interested in writers for whom language is not a given, but for whom language is a problem to solve, and some kind of for whom language is not transparent, but something with which a writer struggles, and I think it's true of all the writers in this volume, and I think that we have very different linguistic styles in Madeleine and RAWI's writing, and I've dedicated some time to thinking about what kind of voice I would have to use to render them, because and I'm not sure to what extent this is the result of the languages that you both mentioned seeping into the writing voice, but for example, in Madeline's writing, I have a feeling that that there's a desire to stop language and to freeze language into small moments of discovery, and there are a lot of sentences that enclose something, and we move on from sentence to sentence. I have a feeling there's a lot of precision and control, while in RAWI's writing I have a feeling that there's language that runs wild and accumulates effects along the way, and there are spectacular effects that both of these voices achieve, but in very, very different ways, which both feel very fresh to me. I'm not a native reader of English, but vis-a-vis certain other writers that I've read, there's a certain unfamiliarity to this sort of writing, and this is what attracts me, and I think it's not necessarily to do with other languages, because some of the other writers here, there's Mark Anthony Jarman, for example, who has Irish ancestry, but I'm not sure that he speaks Irish, or that he spoke it at home, and yet he shares with the writers here a sensibility, yes, a way of thinking about language that intrigues me, and so I think it's I don't think there are strategies which always work regardless of the author. I think it's a problem that one faces and needs to solve one case at a time. So I haven't thought of particular, I haven't armed myself in theoretical possibilities, but I think that, I hope that the voice will come. I would be afraid of doing something that may be done, that is approximating this kind of foreignness by using foreign versions of Polish, say thinking of Ukrainian inflected Polish or Russian inflected Polish, because we are bringing in even more cultural contexts into this, and suddenly we have a novel set in Montreal, and the character sounding as if he is someone who lives on the eastern border of Poland, and that just won't do. So I don't want to do that, but I think that what defines the writing of RAWI and Madeline is not so much the linguistic inflection. I mean, not an influx of a particular foreign language, but an attention to style, to form, that I find very attractive.
I wonder, you described both styles very beautifully, and I think it's, from my readings of both your works, it seems really true that your writing is very contemplative, reflective, poetic, measured, and with RAWI you pack so much into a sentence that so much information, so many metaphors, that by the time you end the sentence you can't remember how it began, and yet again you're propelled, you're forced to keep going. You don't want to go back because the plot is so interesting and so just compelling. So I wonder if this pace of the narrative relates to your actual writing. Do you write that way? Is the pace of the writing something, of the narrative, something that is replicated in your actual writing of it? One. And the question for you, KRZYSZTOF, would be, do you think that might actually determine the pace at which you translate as well? In other words, perhaps I wouldn't be surprised if these packed sentences with this like very strong narrative thrust maybe require you to be really measured and paused and reflective. It could be the opposite, and in the case of translating Maddie's work, it might be breezier and faster, the process. I don't know. I'm putting this out there. I'm sorry, I'm spoken too much already. Going off script here. What do you think?
It's such a great question. Yeah. And interesting because I think Rawi and I both know quite a lot about each other's processes, so it is interesting to compare. And in my case, I do write more consistently and more slowly, but it doesn't take me ages to finish a book. I tend to finish it many times. So for me, it's really a process of distillation, which I hope it sort of gives a density to the writing. It feels very light on the surface, and hopefully on closer reading is actually denser in volume or something.
Yeah,
there's something. It's like both airy but something else, and a different kind of dimensionality. And that is changing. I have to say, now that I'm into a completely different kind of novel, that process has changed dramatically. But for sure, with Dogs at the Perimeter, it was slow and long and difficult. Yeah.
I tend to write very fast, and I think I'm very spontaneous, and I'm a bit embarrassed to tell other writers how long it would take me to write a book.
Do tell. You must tell us.
I think I'll make a lot of enemies. But I feel I think, and that comes from something probably biographical. I think my accent always was the most revealing thing about me. Anywhere I existed. In the Arab world, the moment I open my mouth, it's known that I'm a minority from a certain class belonging to a certain religion. And that is very revealing for a minority to exist with that existence. And then I moved to New York, it was the same problem. And it's still the same problem up till now. Still, in the Canadian context, always the same problem. So I think that I speak with certain, I would say, it's probably a very harsh thing to say, with certain embarrassment. I think I feel exposed when I speak. And so my relationship to language was something very, we say in French, débarras. I just want to get rid of it. And I think I write with the same intensity, something to just reveal as quickly as possible and get rid of as quickly as possible. I feel very transparent when I speak or when I write. So it's a very conflicting existence. And my relationship to writing is one of embarrassment. Not embarrassment about my culture, who I am, etc. But the fact that I can be so transparent, or been pointing out your origin, or I find accents are very, revealing. I mean, and it opens doors to judgment, or exotic, or whatever, So I think, and I'm not saying this is particular to me, but it's probably. Okay, I'll shut up. I said too much. Maybe I should leave now.
Well, if I can
Yes,
comment on this.
yes, please.
I have a feeling that both of these styles have a poetic sensibility at their heart, but these are different types of poetry, because I have a feeling that, and we did once talk about this several years ago when I came to interview RAWI, that RAWI's writing is very, well, it is voice driven, and there's also there's the speaking self. There is the I which speaks, and that is a very strong presence. And so I would see that linking more to perhaps romantic poetry, or perhaps, and we talked about that, perhaps Lebanese, the Lebanese Zajal, perhaps Rawi can say a little more about it, because we talked about how the experience of seeing dueling Lebanese poets somehow influenced this style, which is very much a
Improvisation.
well, there's improvisation involved, right? And there's speech. I think the vernacular. Whereas I with Madeline's work, I would see comparisons to modernist poetry, perhaps imagist poetry, where the subject perhaps disappears sometimes, but there's an intensity of image, and the images glow, and that's why I said I think it's a series of effects, while RAWI's sentence seems to accumulate towards one big effect at the end, and all those twists and turns that it's taken along the way have a payoff. It's a different pace, it's a different organization of
Right.
text. And this is, of course, very difficult for me to render into Polish. But I don't think that there would be a difference in pace, because as you've just said, to unpack the sentence that RAWI wrote fast, if we accept what you've just said, is a very slow process, because I need to look very closely at each of those twists and turns, and yes, and there are metaphors which pile up and which require attention. So no. This will take me a very long time to translate this sentence, and it's not just the length of the sentence itself. And it needs to. At the end, it's not just the matter of the metaphors which need to work, but the sentence needs to
Right.
be coherent. It needs to work as a
Sorry, I
sentence.
caused you pain. So
I forgive you, Rawi.
Yes.
And yes, and I don't. I haven't yet translated that much of Madeline's
Right.
text, but I devoted quite a lot of time to the extract with Dogs on the Perimeter, because the sentences are intense, as we said. They have a charge
Right.
that needs to be detected and
Right.
exploded.
Of course, we could spend a long time talking about the challenges, right? Other challenges of translation, and one in particular that I hope you report back to us is something in Simple Recipes, that thing that the father who's learning from a chef on TV, right? And he says, take the walk on the wild side. Walk on the wild side. That will be, you need to report back, because you need to be done with the story by the time the residency ends, correct?
I hope so. Yes, I
So,
hope to
yes.
be done with the story. Yes, I promise I will report back, but I admit that I haven't yet found a solution to this.
Right. Now, I really want to ask something that, of course, as translators, we're always dealing with, which is how attached is the writer to this particular thing? So since you're sitting right here, I wonder, how attached are you to the walk on the wild side?
Yes. Well, that's a very famous chef, or was famous in Vancouver when I was growing up, named Martin Yan. And he had this cooking show. And he kind of introduced Chinese cooking to Vancouver, which seems absurd now, because, Vancouver is the epitome of Chinese cooking in some ways. But he would always have a pun with the word walk. And they were so ridiculous, and as children we hated them, but of course our parents found them so hilarious and liked to repeat them over and over and over again. So I think, what's the word for walk in Polish?
It's walk
There
as
you
well.
go.
The problem is, well, I was a little surprised at this, because the reference is, to counter culture in some ways. I mean, the song by Lou Reed is a classic, but it's not by someone who it would be very popular, for example, with the the young readers today, for example, or
Ignorance.
yes. Well, I mean in Poland. So I'm not sure if the reference to the actual Lou Reed song would work.
I would
And
accept simply a pun with the word walk.
that's what I was thinking about. Yes, that's what I was thinking about. Yes, thank you. You've made my job that much easier.
So are there things that you feel particularly attached to? And I wonder what those things are. Are there things that when you're writing, you arrived at them and thought, yes, this is brilliant. This is like, those moments when you're writing and you found a metaphor, you found this thing that's perfect. And then, of course, and especially both of you who are translated into so many different languages, this must come up regularly. And you might be consulted, and sometimes you might not be consulted, so you're not even aware of what those things that you were so proud of, removed, excised from the translation. Do you experience that kind of thing, RAWI?
Oh, I give up on translators. Oh, look, the room is full of them. Well, I was in French translation. I had a very good translator. Though I remember in De Niro's game, there was a few things that, because she didn't know the history, there was a few things that I had to point out. The word Syriac means, she translated as Syrian. She didn't know what Syriac is, which is, it's an ancient language, it's a dialect of Aramaic, etc. All these historical charged reference that sometimes, if you don't know, so that was a good catch on my part. I felt very proud, I had problem with the Arabic translation. Unfortunately, I don't think it was well translated in Arabic. I think the person who it was translated by many translators. The last one was probably the most disastrous because it was translated from French to Arabic, from French translation to Arabic. But I think the translator never experienced the West, fundamentally experienced the West, and like the pun or jokes that the slang, the American slang, or you can't even explain it. So there's always this problematic. For the rest of the languages, I have no idea. I have no idea. Of course, I was told that by a friend that the German translation of De Niro's game was translated by a poet, but who kind of appropriated the whole book, made it his own long poem. He loved it so much, so he loved the book. So that's what I was told.
Well, titles. One thinks about titles, right? I don't know if you arrive at the titles of your books before you start writing them, or if it's a torturous process or not, but you have really good examples of what has been done to your titles in translation, right? Both of you. Yeah. You want to share that with the audience? Because it's pretty funny. Titles.
So Dogs at the Perimeter, in all its translations, there is no translation that has kept the original title because it was considered too difficult to translate, too awkward. I think mostly around that word perimeter. Some of the titles are beautiful, and we were speaking earlier that some of the translators asked me what some of the titles I had considered but not used were, and that ended up being one of the Spanish titles, The Echo of the Empty Cities. I thought that worked well. Actually, that was a title from RAWI. That was a beautiful title. But just to follow up on something else you said, about what sometimes gets lost in the translation, what I've also found is that sometimes something is gained in the translation, and this happened for me, I think, with the German translation of the novel, in that there's a narrative switch that happens in the novel when it feels like it's moving into third person, but what's actually happened is that the narrator has disappeared and invisibilized herself in order to tell someone else's story. It's often missed by English language readers, even though for me the transition is quite clear, but it's rarely picked up in the English language. In German, maybe because of something intrinsic to the language, it's always clear who's speaking. And so that narrative switch was so clear in German, and so I think it's one of the most important parts of the book, because it's about disappearing in order to reclaim oneself. And is very much tied into certain things with the Khmer Rouge. In this way, in some sense, I sometimes wonder if the German edition is in a weird way, a truer edition of the book. It's made my intentions clearer than I was able to make it in English.
It's beautiful. We were talking earlier today during lunch about all these metaphors that translators come up with for what they do, for what we do. And in both your novels, the narrators are, in one way or another, trespassing. They're having access to other people's correspondence, medical records in your case, and the neuroscientist is reading all these reports of patients and really examining them in order to find Hiroji, the missing character. And in your case, this person who often has delusions and believes he is a cockroach, thinks that he can go into people's homes and actually breaks in and reads their letters and sometimes burns them and does all these things. And so I wonder if, and it's pathologized in both cases, and I wonder if, KRZYSZTOF, what do you think about this? Is the translator a trespasser of sorts who dissects a text and tries to go behind it, and like an extreme voyeurist of sorts?
Well, it's a very attractive metaphor, I have to say. But it suggests certain bad intentions, right? Or it suggests wanting to see beyond what the writer wants to reveal, and I hope that it is not exactly the case, because well, we do sometimes, when we translate, we do sometimes help ourselves read the text, crack the text, let's say, by, well, of course, reading other works by the author, but that's still allowed. There's nothing wrong with that. But we might also go on to read biographies, and that's still okay. Then there are letters, personal documents, journals, and that's borderline okay, perhaps. And then, of course, we could talk to people whom the writer knew, or friends. We could do that. This might be revealing. I haven't done this.
Now you're making me all paranoid.
I think this is more true of writers from long time past, where you don't have access to the person themselves. So I hope this is not exactly the case, because my thinking about translation would be looking at a text and trying to take in as much as you can at a glance. So if you have the comparison to a voyeur, I guess a voyeur looks at a person when the person does not want to be seen. But I think the translation is looking at a text when it does want to be seen, but trying to see more, or trying to see as much as you can. And I think it's a question of empathy, perhaps. I always have this idea that a translator has to be a good listener, or has to empathize with another person. We are dealing with another person's work. We are separated by the book, but there's someone else on the other end. However many screens there are, and codes and languages, it's ultimately, I think, a meeting between two people. And so I like to think that we're not breaking into these people's houses, but that we're trying to see who they are, look at them really closely, but just the things that they reveal.
So I
don't know.
couldn't come up with a better endpoint to this. Thank you, Madeline. Thank you, KRZYSZTOF. Thank you, RAWI. Thank you so much.